Good morning. My name is Laura House. I am the Director of Instructional Design in the Center for Global and Online Education at Stanford. You may know us as the Stanford Center for Professional Development, or SCPD, but we're changing our name in a couple of days. So the Center for Global and Online Education. First off, thank you for those of you who chose to attend this session. I noticed there were some other really interesting talks at this time, including one about Pokemon, I believe. So the fact that you're here tuning in is a compliment, and I'll try to give you some useful tips out of this session today. I want to talk to you about a negotiation role play that we've designed for our online professional learners. And I'll run through a background for this activity, how it's been run for a very long time in an in-person context with MBA students here at Stanford. I'll talk about how we converted it to an online modality, the specific design choices we made, and some considerations if you're thinking about moving an in-person role play online. I'll talk about some of the advantages to this online version and advantages that it has even over the in-person version and over AI-based activities. I'll give you a short demo of the exercise we've created. You'll see some of the gamification elements that we used, and I'll end with just a short summary and some tips for those of you who may be looking to build an activity like this. So this is Professor Margaret Neal, the wonderful, great Professor Margaret Neal, who's been teaching negotiation for 40 years. She's one of the world's leading experts on negotiation, and she teaches classes here at Stanford. She teaches MBA students. In her in-person teaching, she uses several different negotiation role plays. And in one of these role plays, which Professor Neal created and calls the new recruit, students pair off, and one plays the role of a job recruiter, and the other plays the role of the job candidate. And they have a set amount of time, say 30 minutes. And within that time period, they need to agree to a range of issues, such as salary, signing bonus, location. There's actually 8 issues that you see here. Each selection gives a different number of points to the job candidate and to the recruiter. Now, neither the job candidate nor the recruiter can see how many points the issues are worth to their counterpart. And the whole point is to get more points for yourself, whether you're playing as the candidate or as the recruiter. There are different kinds of issues in the negotiation. Some issues are called congruent issues. This means the candidate and the recruiter value the issue in a similar way. So in this example, location would be a congruent issue. You can see the point values are very similar for the recruiter and the candidate. Students don't necessarily know going into the negotiation that they value this issue in the same way. And so one of the learning outcomes for this activity is to discover what the congruent issues are, because you certainly don't want an outcome where you've both agreed to Chicago thinking that you're being accommodating when actually New York is better for both parties. Other issues are what we call distributive issues. So for distributive issues, you can think my loss is your gain. Salary is typically a good example of a distributive issue where the more money you get, the less I get. And you can see that reflected here in the point values. And finally, some issues are integrative issues, which are issues that the candidate and the recruiter value differently. So for example, a high signing bonus in this instance is more important to the candidate than it is to the recruiter. And you see that reflected in the point values. And vacation days are more important to the recruiter than they are to the candidate. And so it's these integrative issues where you have an opportunity to create more value for both parties. So if you're, for example, the candidate, you should be willing to take fewer vacation days in exchange for a higher signing bonus. So identifying where you have integrative issues and using that knowledge to structure different packages and deals and make trades results in more value for both parties. And that's another key learning outcome of this exercise. So that just gives you a sense of the kind of role play that these learners are doing when they do this in person in Maggie's courses. Okay, so that's the background for the in-person negotiation. My team had the opportunity to work with Professor Neal to create a fully online, self-paced course on negotiation for professional learners all around the world. These are learners who are emerging technical and engineering leaders. They want to build their influencing skills. And the way that Professor Neal teaches negotiation is as a way to influence others. So her course is one of the courses in this program that helps learners to build those influencing skills. And hands-on practice with negotiation is vital for helping our learners become better negotiators. So in addition to some assignments where they actually have to go out into the real world to a department store to negotiate, it was really important that the online course also incorporate activities like Professor Neal's new recruit role play. So often in online education, I hear this question, how do we move this in-person activity, this in-person thing online, right? That's what we heard a lot with COVID, moving things online. And if we ask the question that way, we're probably going to come up with a solution where you're doing the same in-person activity, but now you're just doing it over Zoom, or you might end up with a tool that lets learners chat with another learner from the course and have a negotiation, or something like we talked about in the early stages of this project, where we would have an AI that was programmed to behave in certain complex ways that would mirror a human negotiation counterpart. And if you take one thing from this talk, I hope it's this, that this is the exact wrong question to ask, because the solution is already embedded in the question. And whenever someone comes to me with this question, I try to reframe the problem and ask instead, how do we help learners achieve the learning goals in light of our business and technical constraints? Or another useful question that I ask is, how would I design this from scratch without the constraints of the existing in-person approach? And what this allows you to do is get to a more innovative solution that actually leverages the technology to enhance the learning. So when you ask this question, you get something like this really complex diagram. It may look familiar to you. This comes out of design thinking, and you sometimes see it called the desirability, feasibility, viability framework. There are various learning goals, business requirements, and technical constraints that you might have, and a good design solution sits in the center of these and delivers all these things. So working with Professor Neal, we identified a few of the main learning goals. One was that we wanted learners to experience a realistic negotiation with a lifelike counterpart. We wanted them to explore and get feedback on specific negotiation strategies, including the ability to structure deals, receive realistic counteroffers, and build rapport. And we also wanted them to be able to go through the activity multiple times and see how the different choices they make impact the end result. And this was something, this last goal was something that it wasn't possible for them to do with the in-person exercise, where they do it one time in class, but they aren't able to go back and explore the different strategies. And there's a variety of experiences that learners have doing this activity in class. So this is something we wanted to address for the online version. Because we deliver paid professional education courses to a global online audience, we did have some real business constraints. We also had some technical constraints. I'll talk specifically about the technical constraints. We wanted a tool that could support branching scenarios, specifically provide like a choose your own adventure behavior. We wanted learners to be able to input any one of 625 possible package deals and have the counterpart automatically generate and respond with a realistic counteroffer. We needed to integrate it in our LMS. It had to support many users at once. We preferred a Stanford supported tool that was editable by our team of both PC and Mac users. And so the solution that we settled on was an in-house build using Qualtrics, which is a survey tool we use here at Stanford, and many use it. And sitting behind Qualtrics are some fairly robust programming capabilities for a survey tool. So we wanted to create a branching Qualtrics lesson with the ability to build rapport with this realistic counterpart. We wanted the learner to structure deals and for the computer to generate, again, these realistic counteroffers. And so what we did was we created a technical solution that was supported by a very complex Qualtrics build. One limitation of using Qualtrics is that it doesn't let you loop back and do like a for loop back. So you have to duplicate a lot of the branches. And we ended up with over 800 branches, which if you've ever worked in Qualtrics survey flow, you'll know that that's a staggering amount. And in fact, I wouldn't recommend pushing Qualtrics any further than that. One drawback of the in-person activity, as I mentioned, is that learners only get to experience once. They don't receive the immediate feedback on what they're doing in the moment. And so for the online version, we wanted to create, again, that more choose your own adventure approach. And then because these are time poor adult learners, we wanted to gamify the whole experience and make it more engaging for them to encourage them to do the exercise multiple times. So we made the design choice to gamify the feedback that they receive. Qualtrics was already a tool that we used extensively in our courses. We had confidence that it would meet all of our requirements. And importantly, we had instructional designers on our team who were capable of leveraging all of those features and were familiar with using Qualtrics, which I highly recommend. We also considered using an AI-based simulation, but it became clear that that was going to be difficult to execute based on what technology was available, the project timelines, our budget, but most importantly, we really wanted the ability to control the different paths that learners would go down. And so when you think about all the possibilities of an AI-based activity, it looks like the tree on the left, and it can be really challenging, in fact, impossible to fully control the different outcomes and branches that learners might go down. Some weird things can happen. And we really wanted something more tailored, more like the tree on the right, where we could make sure that the different possible paths were very tightly aligned to Maggie's specific learning goals, Professor Neal, and to all the points in her debrief videos, because these are time-poor learners, and we don't want to send them on a fool's errand going down these paths that aren't directly related to the learning. We want targeted learning. So after the exercise, they watch Professor Neal's debrief video. She has specific points that she debriefs, and we wanted to make sure those were reflected in the different branches. And then learners can explore in a very predictable way the effects of making different decisions and going down the different branches. So this is the key learning benefit that a Qualtrics branching activity provided over, say, an AI-based solution, and particularly for this group of adult learners. Another thing we learned was that AI struggles to create multiple images of the same individual, and images are much less realistic with less of a dynamic range and expression. Whereas we found that our standard image library that we use did have some images of very expressive actors in a wide range of poses. So we went with the real images of real actors. You'll see more of this in the demo that I'm about to give, but the gamification elements mostly take the form of this badge-based feedback. But you'll see this as I go on to the demo, which I will do now. So at the beginning, you'll see you have these different options. And let's, for example, go into a conversation with this negotiation partner who you meet. You can have a conversation with him. In this example, you're choosing an answer where you're taking the needs of both parties into consideration. You get a little badge telling you you've emphasized a problem-solving approach. You're getting positive feedback. There's also negative feedback that you can get if you make poor choices. You can, for example, continue to have this conversation with your negotiation counterpart. In this case, let's select the option where you're emphasizing your alternatives, that you've received several other job offers. You are given another piece of feedback that you have established justification by emphasizing those alternatives, making it justifying your worth in this deal. You can keep having a conversation with Derek. You can, decide that you want to make an offer. But if you keep having a conversation, additional options are open to you. So, for example, you can ask him what issues are important to him in this conversation, in this negotiation. Derek tells you that vacation days are important for him. Again, that's that integrative issue. And so you can start to think about structuring a deal or making a concession where you're agreeing to take fewer vacation days in exchange for a higher signing bonus. Again, you can have conversations with Derek. You can ask him about his preference for location. There's various choices that you can make here. Some of these choices lead to you discovering what the integrative and congruent issues are. And this is the one where he says he prefers that you work in New York, where you've uncovered that this is now the congruent issue. And there are various responses that you can give to this. You can leverage that to your advantage, or you can just agree on New York, which was done in this example. You're given some additional, again, positive feedback. I think I only included positive feedback in this example. And then, you've exhausted all possibilities for conversation, and you can choose whether you want to make the first offer or let Derek make the first offer. So let's choose to make the first offer. And let's choose some options that are very favorable for you as the candidate. You'll choose 90,000 New York, a 10% signing bonus, and you might be tempted to choose something really great, 30 vacation days. But then, of course, you're reminded that you have this concession. You've agreed to 10 vacation days in exchange for a higher signing bonus. You've also agreed to New York. So let's make sure we've selected New York, and we'll adjust our vacation days down to the agreed amount. So we have our values all in place. You also see the other, sort of badges that you've gotten here. We have our values all in place, and we're ready to submit this offer to Derek. Derek was pleased enough with the offer that he hasn't immediately walked away. Some paths do result in him walking away. He's given you the computer has generated a counter offer that's reasonable based on the inputs that you've provided. And let's say that in this situation, you want to make a counter offer. And you can actually structure, a counter offer, and Derek will respond in various ways. I think in this example, Derek doesn't get upset with you. He just continues to make an offer that you can then choose to accept. So in this case, we'll accept the offer of Derek, and you can see the outcome when you actually get to a deal, which you don't in all situations get to a deal. There's a summary, you've reached an agreement, you've earned the number of points that was for the candidate for those options. You get a summary of how you did. And in this case, it's generally positive feedback because you've made fairly good choices in this example that I've chosen to give. And the way we have this set up and integrated is that they are able to try this again and try multiple times and go down the different paths. Okay. Then let's go to some of the possible next steps for us. So one thing we need to do still is to deploy this exercise to learners and to a variety of learners. And we want to start getting feedback from learners, getting data as well to understand what choices they're making, how we can better support their learning, how to make this even more effective and engaging, how to give even better feedback for them in their learning. I'm also very interested in comparing the data we get with the data that Maggie has collected for a very long time for her in-person exercises. And then just to sum up some of the key takeaways that we have for this project, and there's many, many things I can touch on here, and I'll talk about some of the ones that I feel are most important. One is that online can actually have some benefits over in person. And this is surprising for some people. It's not surprising for me because I work in this space, but often people assume that moving things online has to be negative. And yet there are often opportunities to leverage the affordances of technology to make some improvements to learning. In our example, online learners can do the exercise multiple times and gain practice using different negotiation strategies. There's specific decision points and specific strategies and specific learning outcomes that we've designed into that experience. And then in Professor Neal's debrief videos, she specifically unpacks those different points. So it's a very, very targeted exercise. Secondly, AI is not always the answer when it comes to these kinds of role plays. We're seeing lots of interest in using AI-based tools. And one of the arguments for doing that in this course was that our competitors are doing it. And that may be a valid business reason, but in terms of the learning, we did find one major downside, which was the inability to control the learning experience in the way that we wanted to, and to ensure a certain experience for our time-poor learners, ensure alignment to these desired learning outcomes. Thirdly, emphasizing the value of problem framing. So again, shifting from how do we move it online to how do we help learners achieve the learning goals in light of our business and technical constraints will often open up new possibilities to leverage the technologies to enhance learning. It's really important. It was very important in this case. We couldn't have done this project without an instructional designer who could get into the weeds with Professor Neal. We read her whole book, but also understand the technology and fully leverage the technical capabilities of Qualtrics, who had a bit of programming experience. Pruning. If I had to do this over, I would be even more relentless in pruning the branches, getting even clearer on the most important learning outcomes, and doing this very early on in the process when the cost to making changes is still low. In the end, even though this was a targeted learning experience, we ended up with over 800 Qualtrics branches, which is staggering. We've since built another exercise in the course, and it works through a very different logic, so there wasn't the need for as many branches, but we did also prune it down a lot more, and by comparison, it only has 50 branches. Building prototypes was very helpful for testing whether the Qualtrics functionality could support different scenarios. So for example, we wanted to know if the computer could generate a reasonable counteroffer. So before we committed to using Qualtrics, we did build a prototype just to test that out. Storyboarding was also essential. I won't go into the details of what we did. I have a screenshot in a moment where I'll show you some of the storyboards that we've created, but we found Miro boards, slides, Google Sheets to be all very helpful. Even learning about how branching dialogues are done in video game design was helpful as well. So looking at the analogs to what you're doing is a good tip. And finally, don't be afraid to invest time in the design before you move on to the build. And it may feel inefficient to be spending lots of time on the design, but it'll pay off in the end with a more targeted and elegant learning experience. So you may have seen a curve like this, where as you move through the phases of stages of production, the cost of change goes up. So the point is you want to get everything out on paper, make all your mistakes early on when the cost to fail is still low. And again, it may feel inefficient, but it will pay off in the end. Here are some of the storyboards, just some examples of the kinds of storyboards we've used in these kinds of role plays. And again, there's a lot of variety in what's needed depending on the goals of your exercise. I just one note of acknowledgement before I move on to answering a few questions. So just mostly I want to acknowledge Professor Margaret Neal, who worked very closely with us down in the weeds on this exercise. It's her exercise, it's her content, it's her course. She provided the essential subject matter expertise on this and also kindly gave us permission to share this example with you all today. Ashley Stump, Robin Woodman in, I guess our new acronym is SEGO, who are part of the core team and were very instrumental in helping us to get this over the line. And then finally, just a mention of Mark Sanders in SEGO and Natalie Arsenault from DRCC at Kellogg School of Management, who helped us figure out some things around how we license this content for our course, given that we're repurposing and using it in an alternative format. Yeah, so I see a few questions, and I think I'll just start with the first one. Did you use a storyboarding application to plan out all the 800 branches before building within Qualtrics? So Qualtrics has two sort of, if you're familiar with Qualtrics, there are structural elements called blocks in Qualtrics, and blocks hold questions. And so you have a view in Qualtrics where you are figuring out what questions go in each block, and you have a view that's called your survey flow, where you're programming in the logic moving between the different blocks. And so we found like a visual storyboarding tool like Miro is what we use to be really useful when you're planning out the big chunks, the blocks. And then we use more of like a document or like even writing down on paper to do the questions within the blocks. For the exercise where we have fewer branches, we did actually build out the Qualtrics survey flow in a Google Sheet and found that to be really helpful. So we had one thing that you can do in a Google Sheet is you can group rows together. And so you can have the same kind of expand and collapse functionality that you get within the Qualtrics survey flow. There's a question about the resource investment to build this simulation. In terms of number of hours, I don't have a number, but I will say that the actual production time, when we had talked about using AI-based tools and working with external vendors, was going to be many months. It was going to be something like 6 months of working with a vendor and many, many hours of work to do that. This was considerably less than that in terms of total time. But I'd say, yeah, I don't have an estimate, but it was a very large amount of time and a very large commitment. And I think that was due to the fact that this exercise was particularly complex. I think it depends. There's no, set amount of time. I think it just depends on the complexity of the lesson that you're trying to build. Let's see. What are the different resources you use to create this educational activity, and how long did it take you to create? It took us a few months. It's taken us a few months to create this. And the main resources that we used were, and on the content side, were our wonderful subject matter expert, Professor Margaret Neal, and her book and her course content, her learning resources. She's been teaching this exercise for many years. The exercise itself is her exercise, but there are content libraries out there with a lot of different negotiation role plays that you can purchase for use in your own courses. This happens to be Professor Neal's exercise, but it's used by a lot of different educators around the world. And then in terms of the technical resources, I mean, mostly just our own knowledge and expertise of the technology and different a lot of reading about how best to storyboard these kinds of things. I think we're at time. It's all gone very, very fast. I really appreciate those of you who are here tuning in and those of you who will watch this later. It's been a wild ride. We've learned a lot. And of course, if you have any questions, hopefully we can find another chance to connect and get any further questions answered. Thank you for tuning in.